All right, my darling students, we are going to do a pinch pot that is going to be a fruit or vegetable. So today I want to do an avocado with a pit. So it's really helpful to have an actual example in front of you, or at least have photo references. So here's my avocado, taking a good look at what I got. I got a smooth side, I got texture, I got my little ball there, like I'm looking at my overall shape and silhouette. Um, so those are all things that I want to include in my pinch pot. The goal in this project is to make it as realistic as possible. Now, if you want to make it a different size, like you want to scale it up, like say you want to make a giant strawberry or a big cherry or something like that, by all means, but it should be a fruit or a vegetable, 0 potatoes. Lumpy potato is a stage in the process, so it's not cool to do that as your thing. So what I'm doing right now is I'm starting off, I'm going to do a double pinch pot. That's really helps in terms of making our form. And I'm going I always start from the middle, pressing my thumb into the center, and then as I'm moving my hand around, I'm pushing my thumb against my hand so I can feel the wall thickness and make sure that that is nice and even. I'm also working at keeping this kind of narrow because this is a tiny little pinch pot. It's not a very big thing. But I find that closing a form is really helpful in terms of making, and it doesn't matter what shape you're going to make, start off with your closed form. This closed form is a really great way to create kind of sculptural elements without having to go back. So a lot of times students want to just do it solid, and if you do it solid, it's a lot harder to get everything even, and it's also more likely to blow up. So we're not doing this solid. So I want my two pieces to come together fairly well. There's a couple of little like funky edges, so I'll just tear those guys off. We'll see how that goes. That's looking pretty good. And notice I'm not putting this down on the table. I've been keeping it in my hand the whole time. So I'm going to take my wooden knife and we're going to score this. And you want to score it nice and heavy, really deep, like halfway into our piece, which is why my walls, so like this like soft little scoring nonsense, that is nothing. You have to dig into it, okay? And so I'll go over it and I'll do like my little up and down like checks, and then I'll go back and see how I'm going back and forth even in terms of which direction I'm going. So you want to make this like an awful mess right here, okay? Total Frankenstein together. Change the direction of your cross hatching, and then you're going to use the other side of it to actually smooth that all out. So really we're stitching the clay. So clay from one of the pinch pots needs to be traveling over to the other pinch pot, and in that process, that is how we are joining these together. And you can see that now you're starting to get kind of a lumpy potato. Now your piece could just look like an awful mess, and that is okay. I'm going to clear off this little space, and I'm going to roll it around on the table like a kitten, because why not? And this is just going to help kind of roll things in. Now, because you went in and you sealed that really well, now there's an air pocket in there, so that has something to actually give it support. Now our goal is to just smooth this all out. So I'm taking my metal rib, my serrated rib, and I'm scratching over the entire surface. And I'm just trying to get this into like kind of the basic shape. And I'm actually going to make my life a little bit easier, because where I've seen people go wrong with this half cut thing is that it just ends up being like a really weird, oddly long in all the wrong places sort of piece. So I'm actually going to sculpt my general shape first and then cut it in half. And then I can have two halves. You don't have to have two halves for the project. You just need to have one piece of fruit or vegetable that looks as realistic as possible. Okay, so this is an exercise in observation. Okay, so now that I've scraped the whole surface, now I took the other side of the rib and I've flattened it as much as humanly possible against the form. And it's because you shouldn't be scraping off stuff. You should just be smoothing it over and kind of compressing it down. And this will take time. Like, you have to go back and forth over this, like, kind of several times. And at this point, I don't need it to be perfect, but I need it to be kind of close so that I can kind of match my shape. And I'm like, okay, that's looking like fairly decent in terms of our shape. So I'm going to take my needle tool and just cut this in half. Okay, and you can see my walls are about a finger's thickness. I'll just go in there and kind of smooth that little bit out. It honestly doesn't matter. It wouldn't come apart. As long as you did a good job scoring those two pieces together, it wouldn't have come apart. Okay, so I'm gonna roll out a little slab. I took off my green measurements that are like basically a half an inch to go to a quarter inch. Roll out a little slab there, and this is going to be the other side of my avocado. But if I add that on there, it's just going to make it like thicker. So I don't want to make it thicker. So I'm actually going to cut off that quarter of an inch off of my avocado because I'm about to add that back on. And I think this is where students can kind of go wrong when they're trying to do at least the avocado thing. So just keep paying attention to your form. If it doesn't look right, then it's not right. I'm going to add some water here because I'm not going to do quite as heavy a scoring as I did before, but as I attach this, I do want to make sure that it's in the shape of my avocado. And you can see how much I'm like really trying to reference that form. And I think that's really important to have that sort of reference image. If you try to do it from what's in your head, you're going to end up with the most cartoony, like stick figure version of whatever it is that you're going to make. So I'm just going to rip off this edge, and you can see I'm doing it really close together, kind of like a bottle cap, and almost pulling it into the wall of the domed form. And that's actually helping it adhere to the piece. So if I didn't have the water and this step, then I'd need to really go back and kind of score that piece up. So let's take a look at how I did. And I can kind of smooth those all out with just the flat side of my wooden knife. And get rid of any of that like excess clay that I don't need. Okay, so now we'll go back over and smooth it out again. It's a whole bunch of like rough it up, smooth it out, rough it up, smooth it out. And I want to make sure that I get all the way to the edge there and flatten that out too, because again, I want that to be like, so it got a little distorted as I was like working on it, which, it's just a thing. It's not a flaw. It's a feature. It's part of the process. Okay, let's check it against the form again. I want to make that little dent over in the side. And I also want to make sure, like, because it's like kind of narrow at the top and a little bit fatter at the bottom. So as I'm shaping it, I'm using like the whole palms of my hand to just kind of mush that around. The other thing you want to remember is that there is air on the inside, so that's the other side that's actually giving you support. If there wasn't air in there, or if there was some way for the air to get out, it would collapse on itself. Okay, so now that I have this pretty smooth, let's check this shape against our avocado. All right, so my profile is a little bit funky. It's like thicker on the top than I want it to be. I want that. It's more of like a dewdrop like shape. So I'm just going to try to push that down a little bit while actually kind of pulling and cupping it with my hand on the thicker side to try to push that up. See how that's doing. Okay, so that's looking a little bit better. It's still a little bulbous up on the top, so I'm going to try to push that down again. And part of why it's harder for me to push it down is because there is that air pocket in there, and that air pocket in there is pushing back. So it won't really let me ever like kind of collapse it, which is good. And then we'll smooth things out again. And as I'm smoothing it, I am pushing a little bit harder to try to really change that shape. So that's the other thing, that doing this little kind of smoothing and raking technique can really help in terms of, depending on your force, can actually help you change the shape a little bit. All right, let's check that out again. Yeah, that's a lot better. I'll just, that last little bit I can just kind of tap down and sort of beat it into place. And I'll go into that edge. I always end up going off frame with this stuff. It's hard, guys. It's just really hard. One day I'll figure it out. I thought I had this one figured out. It's much better than yesterday. Okay, so now we should talk about texture. So I need to figure out what texture I want, and I got, so I have some brushes that have like little rounded edges, and I think so I'm looking for like kind of a whole bunch of like dots and stuff. So I'm just hitting it a lot. And that is what you do. And the more I can kind of randomize that pattern, the better it's going to look. And I think you should just kind of try things out and see what it is that you're getting. And if it's what you like, then continue. If it's not what you like, then stop. So that's starting to look pretty good. Now let's deal with the inside. So I'll flatten that out on the table a little bit now that I've hit it a whole bunch. And I think I just want to work a little bit on the edge to define that a little bit more. So I'm going to take my needle tool and I'm going to actually try to use it like really on the edge. Of course I will use it off frame again because it's hard. All right, so there's my needle tool, and I'm going to really gently kind of push down. I'm going to try to keep it as kind of close to the edge as I can. And I'm not trying to I'm not trying to scrape into it. I'm really just trying to like kind of press that down. So I almost get a little like rounded edge instead of like a pointy. And we'll make it all the way around. And right now it's looking like a little bit too defined. So I'm going to kind of go over it, like I'll soften it a bit. And again, this is always about kind of going back and forth between making it go, like cleaning it up, adding more detail, softening the detail, making it a little bit harder. So you're just constantly going in a little dance back and forth with that. And I'll smooth that out again because I don't want it to be that heavy. And clean that line. So again, smooth it out, add a texture. Smooth it out, add a texture. Okay, so still a little bit heavier than what I want. So now I'm going to go back and actually push this back in so that it's a really fine line, but it's also kind of like a lumpy, so I can see that texture kind of coming up to the side. It's those little tiny like edges and the transition points that really make your piece strong. The other thing that I want to do is I want to make sure that I'm not just tapping, like I don't want to make a row of those marks, so I want to bring that down a little bit. So that's making that line that I made a little bit thinner and also making it the skin that I made of that a little bit thinner. We'll put that as the little stem bit there. But always pay attention to your transitions, guys. I'll shave that top little bit off. And I haven't used any water besides for when I joined the wall, the flat wall to the piece. And we'll go back and just smoosh that down a little bit more. Okay, now it's time for the pit. Now that I got that looking good. I'm excited. I'm excited about that shape. I'm excited about that texture. Now let's make a little tiny pinch pot. That will be the pit for my avocado. Okay, and then I'm just going to shave off the little excess on here, get my avocado shell seed nut ready to go. And I need to poke a hole into this area, okay? Because I don't want to poke a hole in my avocado seed. The hole is super important. I'm going to add some water, and I'll talk about that in a second. But first, I'm going to add some water. And then because I'm not going to do like a really heavy job of joining it. So I just want to make sure that I wiggle and kind of press it down onto the surface, and also try to make sure that it makes the right shape as well, which I just mucked it up. So I got my water. Do some little like wiggle and stick. And then I'm going to go in and smooth this into itself so instead of trying to use a really big tool, I'm going to use my needle tool to kind of work that into the surface of the other piece, of the main piece. And again, I'm going to do that off frame because that's super helpful. And now I'm actually using the corner, because my needle tool has a nice 90-degree angle on it, so I'm using that as a way to smooth out that transition, because again, your transitions super matter. So those are the parts of your piece that you should be paying almost the most attention to make sure that that's what's going to make it realistic versus kind of like a blob. Because if I did this on my piece and it was just this like smooth little like slope, that's not what your avocado looks like. Go back and look at your avocado again. And you can do whatever fruit or vegetable you want, except for a potato. So anyways, let's talk about why I put that hole in there and why it's on the inside, because still there's air trapped in there. But now I've created, inside my avocado body, there's now a way for the air inside the pit to go into the avocado body. Then I'm going to put a hole at the very end. I'm going to put a hole into the body of the avocado, like right up where the stem goes. But I don't want to poke a hole in my avocado pit, because that would ruin the illusion. Okay, if I didn't put a hole in my avocado, like having it go into the main chamber and then having an air hole going out on the main chamber, which is the like avocado body, then I would create a bomb. Because as soon as you get air trapped inside a space, so like hot air expands, but more importantly, moisture. Like even if we have this piece bone dry, there's still chemical water in there, and that chemical water turns into steam, and that steam needs to get out, and it doesn't need a big hole, it just needs a little tiny hole in order to do that. So I made sure that I put that hole going into the other chamber, and I made sure that was nice and open. So now again, I'm just spending time smoothing out off screen, smoothing out my avocado pit. Now I'm using my wooden knife. Like really, you can use whatever tool like does the thing that you need it to do, then you're using the right tool. So back of the needle tool, just because it has a 90-degree angle, like works out spectacular for me. And there's a little area that got a little bit dented in. That it's not the end of the world. You just add some clay to it and everything will be fine. Okay, so now I'm looking pretty close. Like I like that overall like shape and profile. I'm going to poke that hole in there, and I'm making sure that it's, so I don't need to make it super huge. I just want to make sure that it's not plugged up. So that's why I'm going back and forth to make sure that that hole is open. Because I remember otherwise I've made a bomb. Okay, so now I need to put my name somewhere, and I'm going to go with that little tag on the back. So let's make ourselves a little tiny tag. And I'm taking that piece of clay and just pushing it with my thumb into the palm of my hand, so that way the edge of it, this is the important part, the edge of it needs to be super thin because it's paper. So we don't want it to look like this big beefy thing that's sticking off the side of our avocado. We want it to look very thin, so my edge should be thin. Oops, dropped it. So I'm going to pick that up real gentle like. And we'll put it right there. Yay! So that'll be my little label. And then I'll take my needle tool and I'm going to put my initials, again, off screen, on there. There we go. And I'm trying to use the side of the tool again so that it's not too like scratchy with like little crumbs and stuff. I just want it to be real like subtle, or I guess soft, I should say. Okay, so that looks good. I'm pretty excited. The top has kind of like, so I want to try to smooth out that little section. But the other thing that I'm kind of bummed out about now that I did that hole, and now it's like sinking down itself. So I'm actually going to blow into it, which you could kind of see that it like popped it back up again. So I literally just blew into it like a balloon. And now there's a little edge that kind of cracked along the side of the seed or the pit. That's what it is. It's a pit. I don't know why I couldn't say that before. And I'll just smooth that out. I feel like half of this entire process is really just like fussing. So this whole process probably took me in real time without any fast forwards, probably took me about 35 to 40 minutes, which I think is a reasonable amount of time to have for this little like sculpting adventure. Okay, but I want it to be beautiful. It's looking pretty good. This looks pretty matchy. The other one's like a little bit bigger, but that's fine. It's going to shrink down. And in terms of proportions, it's looking pretty decent. I probably could have made my seed a little bit bigger, but I think I'm happy. All right, done.